Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Voices of Sustainability virtual fireside chat series. I'm Charlotte Kahn, and I would like to introduce the Zayed Sustainability Prize before we start our conversation about the ethics of AI. The prize was established in 2008 as a pioneering global award for recognizing organizations and high schools for their sustainable, innovative, and humanitarian solutions. Today, the prize counts 17 years of global impact, with over 400 million people around the world benefiting from its winners' solutions across the categories of health, food, energy, water, climate action, and global high schools. And in today's episode, our guest will explore the evolving role of artificial intelligence in advancing sustainability, unpacking its potential to drive progress in sectors like agriculture and energy, while addressing the environmental challenges it presents. So it's my real pleasure to introduce you to our guests today. We are joined by Stefano Maffulli, Executive Director at the Open Source Initiative, OSI. Hello, Stefano.
Hi.
Hi there. And Paul Duan, who's founder and president at Base Impact. Welcome to both of you.
Hi. Glad to be here.
So let's start with you, Stefano. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about the Open Source Initiative and why you started the initiative, the project?
I didn't start the project. It's a fairly old one. It's an organization started in 27 years ago, in the 90s, when the concept of freedom in software needed to be specified and qualified a little bit more. And freedom meant and still means that you, as the author of the software, you're granting the users downstreams the same rights that you have. In other words, that means that you're giving other people the rights to use, to study, to modify, share, do whatever you want with it, whether charge it for a price or not. And those principles are engraved into a definition. Those are 10 points. And what we have historically been doing at the Open Source Initiative is reviewing licenses. Those are the legal documents that accompany the software. We review those licenses and we make sure that the legal terms actually grant those freedoms. Now, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, we started looking at AI and we realized that it's not really software. It looks like software, behaves like software. It does the same thing that a piece of software does. But the crucial difference is that it's not programmed by a human. There is no source code. In other words, there is no human who has deterministically written things like if A, then B, then C, and those paths cannot be followed. And there are new artifacts. There is no source and binary, which are these concepts that the human writes the software and the computer executes a binary. Those concepts are not into the machine learning space. So we wanted to learn a little bit more about it and adapt the principles of open source software to AI and machine learning.
Thank you very much. Paul, now, Base Impact, why did you start it?
So Base Impact is a tech NGO whose mission is to use AI to help as many people as we can at scale. And I started it 10 years ago when I was, so back then I was a data scientist working in Silicon Valley. I was building algorithms that would impact millions of users on commercial apps that you may have used. And I realized, well, these technologies are very powerful and they enable a few to impact many. But why not use that same power to enact change and to change people's lives instead? And so that's when I realized there was this bit of a disconnect where the most powerful technologies are used to make money and not so much to improve people's lives. And that instead, if you were to apply these technologies to the social sector, we could really create really interesting things. And so 10 years ago, I left Silicon Valley, founded Base Impact, and since then have been working with governments and NGOs around the world.
So we're going to dive into how AI can empower communities and help people bring out positive change in this world. But before we do, Stefano, I just wanted to go back to the origin of the Open Source Initiative, because you mentioned that it had been created during the 1990s. That's when the internet, of course, came about. And at the time, the internet was meant to be a force for good, of course, and it was meant to be decentralized and very open and very transparent. And it's not necessarily been the case, Stefano.
Let's say that, yeah, in my experience, it is still decentralized and open. And it may be that in the way that things have evolved, we see a lot of super powerful corporations and organizations centralizing a lot of those aspects. But the underlying principles below are still there. And the collaboration, the transparency, the community aspects, those values that open source has and um, uh, carries are still there. Like in my mind, they're still there, and it's a matter of the conversations has really moved up a little bit from the technology into the policy space. This is also quite visible in the way the organization is now structured. The open source initiative has always been mostly run by technologists and legal minds who were very focused on reviewing licenses and making sure that the technical ecosystem could thrive. And in fact, you can see that the technical ecosystem thrives. Like everything runs open source right now. 98% of the software out there has a component that is not written by the people who are giving you the phone, the car, or what have you. But at the same time, the conversation has moved up. Like we have hired a lot of people to work on the policy front because we need to educate policymakers to make sure that these principles are still valid and bringing the value that they were supposed to bring, which is to empower more people and give society more control over the digital space.
Absolutely. So, Stefano, can you tell us a bit more about how open source values like transparency and collaboration, the values you've just mentioned, can shape trustworthy, accessible AI systems that support sustainability and social progress, that we ensure that technology is used for good indeed?
Right. This goes back into the root of the challenge that we saw a couple of years ago when we noticed the difference between machine learning systems and software systems. We wanted to make sure that transparency, collaboration, community control were carried into the space and the space of AI. And the principle here is that no opacity will ever give you trust. These machines are inherently unpredictable. They have cannot be what's the word? They're difficult to understand. Like even the original developers, like, and Paul is an expert. Like he actually knows these things. I only repeat what the experts tell me. I cannot really see what's inside, right? You statistically have pretty good understanding that it will come up with a decent response, but it's not necessarily the one that you want, right? It's not 100% predictable. And that means that if you don't know how the system has been built, what choices went into picking the training data sets, for example, how those data sets have been processed and filtered, and how the execution is running, you can't really, even more, you have a level of imperscrutability, if that's the word that I was looking for, I think, right? Openness is what gives you that base layer upon which you can build transparency, you ultimately can build trust.
Thank you very much. Now, Paul, you are clearly one of those technologists who's decided to dedicate his life to use technology for social progress. Can you maybe share some examples with us, or how we can use AI to empower communities and address big issues like unemployment, healthcare, or sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So recently we built a tool called Case AI, which is an AI co-pilot for social workers, and it came from the realization, after having spent 10 years in the tech for good space, that the people who do the most critical work are the frontline workers, but they're critically under-resourced, understaffed, and basically there is not enough time to care for all the people who need care in the world. Um, this is where AI can be an extremely powerful source for good, because it can improve people's productivity, which is not a dirty word. In the social space, we don't talk much about productivity, but in the same way that we all talk about how AI is going to disrupt salespeople, support staff, why can't we use it to instead empower the frontline workers who are delivering social care or healthcare? And so, for example, we work with communities. I can give you one specific example with foster kids. This is a space where we have routinely social workers who may have 50 to maybe sometimes even 100 kids to care for on their portfolio, which is way too much. It means they stay up at night, always afraid of having forgotten something, or maybe maybe they didn't have the time to do the monthly check-in, and they just had to just send a quick email and hope that everything's okay. And they basically, lay awake at night, wondering if they did not forget anything. And this is something where equipping them with AI to make sure they almost have some kind of second brain that says, hey, maybe it's time to call back the principal from that school. Because remember that kid got bullied 3 weeks ago, and we sent something but have not received a response from the school staff. Now would be a good time to follow up, and here will be a draft if you were to send a follow-up email. All that takes not just time, but also a lot of mental load, and AI is great to be able to lessen that. And even more so, generative AI is also very helpful in this space, because social work is not something that's very formalized. It's not industrialized. It's a lot of human work. All the situations are different. It's a lot of unstructured data. It's not like a bank application. You have to read case notes. You have to understand personal situations. You have to take in a lot of different factors. And this is where AI is especially powerful.
Well, what a fantastic use of AI for good indeed. And may I ask, Paul, if the people you want to empower with AI are responsive to it? I mean, it can be hard for people to adopt new technologies, especially, I'm thinking social workers, people who traditionally are not in the tech world, of course. So, what about the adoption of emerging or new tech, very innovative technology?
Well, we've been pretty positively surprised, actually, by how willing they were to try new things. I think part of the reason for that is that there's a lot of fear about AI replacing jobs. But when you talk about social work, it's a space where there's too much work. There's not enough people, and so you don't have the same worry that the worry that you're going to lose your job, because you know that you don't have the time to do everything you would want to do. And it's also very obvious that you can never replace a human component of it. And so we found the social space to be actually a lot more receptive than we thought they would be to new technologies. Sometimes, of course, there are misconceptions to maybe deconstruct. But as soon as they get their hands on the technology, they realize immediately, how it can save them time, but also how it does clearly not replace, the human component. There is one thing where, and I think this matches with Stefano's work. One key component to it, though, is trust, and the fact that we come in as a nonprofit organization. We build open source technology. We're not here to try to sell you something, or to sell your data afterwards. That goes a long way to making people more open to trying things, and in fact, it does help them scratch an itch, because what we see is a lot of frontline workers who use ChatGPT or other technologies in their day-to-day lives. So they have an idea of how AI could be powerful to help them in their work, but they're very they want to do it right, and they know that if they were to use it for in their work, you're talking about sensitive data, you're talking about healthcare data, you're talking about data on vulnerable people. They can't just copy paste a case note about an orphan child that they care for into ChatGPT. So you have this latent desire to use technology to improve their work conditions, but they don't know how. And if you were to provide them a safe environment with the promise that this is transparent, this is ethical, and this is in a controlled and safe environment, then you can assuage a lot of these fears.
Thank you so much, Paul. Very interesting
Yes.
indeed. Yes, Stefano, I mean, I was going to ask you to follow up on that, actually. I mean, what role can open source and tech communities play as AI expands to keep it accessible to underserved populations?
Right. I mean, Paul really makes a very great point where he talks about the social workers using OpenAIs or any other of these proprietary tools. They put in danger the data of the people they care for once they do it. And this was really the reason for open source at the very beginning was exactly for users. It came from users. It came from the early adopters of technologies who wanted to have control of what they were doing. They knew that they could not really always count on the benefactor who would fix a bug or add some features. They needed to have. They knew they had the capacity to fix things on their own. And this is what we want to have. We want to have the same sort of empowering of the ultimately downstream to the users and for AI users. The way to do that, they have to have access to the model weights, the parameters. They need to be able to run it on their own premises without having to share data with others. They need to know, in order to understand how that system has been built, they need to know how the code was, all the choices that went into selecting the data for the training, how the data was trained and filtered, how the training was done, because it is relevant information. It is knowledge that is ultimately going to create and spread the availability and the knowledge to make better systems. Make better systems meaning not only that they perform better, but they have lower impact on society. And the costs of running these are going to be much lower if once we have the same sort of wider availability of systems and tools that we have the same way that we have with software. Like it's really crucial.
So I think we are all pretty much convinced that the benefits of AI are numerous and aplenty, and it can change many aspects of what we're not doing quite right in the world currently. But we also know that as AI expands, its carbon footprint is also likely to expand. I'm thinking data centers, etc., because AI is, of course, very energy hungry. So I was wondering, Stefano, if you could maybe offer us some thinking points here for how AI can also help reduce the energy and carbon emissions it's going to create as it develops. And how can open source communities help accelerate the adoption of cleaner technologies?
Right. That to me goes back into the principles of collaboration, sharing, not reusing, all of these principles that have been very valuable and served us well. I think that they can serve us also in the machine learning space. For example, the one thing where I'm convinced we're wasting a lot is by reinventing the wheel all the time. Like the more I read about the challenges that these large corporations have, they're competing on each other. They're all training on the same data sets. They all seem to be, all of them, they seem to be downloading the internet all the time at every second. It's a known fact, for example, that a lot of the large repositories, and even with a small web server, if you have a website, you can see spikes of traffic of bots downloading constantly your website again and again and again. Why are they doing that? Right. What the internet is not short. It changes. But why are you hitting the same web servers so much and so often? There are the concept of data commons is one that we have started to explore. It's basically repositories that are being curated, assembled with content that can be used for training and reused for training. And the curation part is what's crucial. We have entered in a phase where all of our podcasts, all of our writings, they are up there. We gave them to humans for others to read, right? It was our idea. And we even had, at some point, we made trade-offs and we understood, like, I'm giving you my blog, I'm giving you my podcast, because I want you to read it, and I'm willing to let Google harvest it, or Google or other search engines, to harvest it, because we were getting in exchange free discoverability, right? So I give you the blog, Google takes it, and offers discoverability. So, okay, it's a fair exchange. Now we got to the point where these bots are harvesting our content, and they're going to be using it to create something else, like a chat bot, or a content, something that creates new pictures, or creates podcasts automatically out of written text, right, with our voices. Yeah, is that a fair exchange, right? What are we getting in exchange? So these balances have been broken, and we want to have a way to recreate them. That will also address the sustainability issue. We want to have these data commons. These data commons are a fascinating idea to me. Like large pools of content where there is a curator, and you can go as a content creator, you can say, look, I give it to you, but I really don't want OpenAI or Microsoft to use it exclusively. I would only want it for like a nonprofit AI to be developed on top, like Allen Institute for AI, Luther AI, other researchers like that. Or or I want a few cents every time ChatGPT spits out it's something that resembles my work, right? Let's work on that.
Okay, so what you're advocating here is being more efficient with the way we use AI, and generally with the way we pull or use data, which is an interesting discussion point or thinking point indeed. Paul, from your perspective, how can we scale AI for good, for social good in particular, while keeping it, well, not so energy hungry, I guess, and also transparent, equitable, and sustainable?
Right. So to build upon what Stefano said on the efficiency part, I think on the carbon footprint part, I think there's two sides to it. There's something about efficiency, and there's something about purpose. So efficiency is about not always using the largest large language model that's very often overkill for many tasks. But instead, and this is where open source models are also very useful here, is in being able to use smaller, efficient models, but who are built for a specific task. So, for example, what you want to do is to be able to do, I don't know, to recognize documents, because in the social space, for example, a lot is done in pen and paper. If you want to be able to analyze that, it's important to be able to read all these handwritten notes. We have traditional OCR systems, but we also have custom visual language models now that are very, very proficient at reading these. And so you pretty much take like the best models for this specific task, and that can be a smaller, more efficient one. And this all compounds with the fact that if you do create data commons, you can also create models that have been fine-tuned for specific tasks. Like, for example, for healthcare, you can have healthcare-focused models that are very, very good at caring for patients with this pathology. Instead of using, for example, ChatGPT recently released GPT 4.5, which they retired and made it available only for research use, not for commercial use, because it's such a large model, because it tries to encompass all the knowledge in the internet and beyond that. It's actually extremely uneconomical to run and unecological to run. So pick the best model for the best task. So that's about efficiency, and about purpose. It's really making sure that we do use AI for for meaningful tasks. It's not just about technology. It's about culture. You had this trend recently where I don't know if you saw that on social media. Everyone was Ghiblifying their profile pictures. There's even a worse one. There was one where they would ask ChatGPT to regenerate the same image 100 times. So you take a picture of yourself, you say generate the same picture. It's slightly different because ChatGPT will reimagine it. So broadly similar, but slightly different. run it 100 times, and then in the end you would get some kind of monstrous thing, as if the AI was on drugs and was starting to hallucinate. Okay, so this is fun, but then that means you used 100 image generations for nothing, and image generation is one of the most energy intensive usage of AI, because generating token, image token by image token. Well, was it worth burning a tree for your meme? uh, you know,
Mm.
of course, we have to be mindful of the energy usage of AI, but it's very different when you use it for, when you use it instead to generate an action plan to help job seekers, unemployed people find jobs at scale. This is one of the use cases that we have here in France, trying to use AI as if each of the millions of job seekers in France had had a personal manager who cares for them, who would do like a personal one-on-one every week to make sure that they're best equipped in their job search. It's very different doing that from generating 100 image of your cat through ChatGPT, right? So how do we make sure that we have these meaningful usage of AI? And I think the best way to ensure that is really to democratize the usage of AI, so that it's in the hands of the frontline workers who need it the most.
So it sounds like we are going to require a lot of education here to encourage people to be more ethical themselves in their usage of AI in their careers, etc. It's time to wrap up this conversation, but before you both go, I just wanted to ask you maybe a last question, inviting a very short answer, and to think about the most powerful way AI can be used to drive sustainability and social change, according to you.
As a former architect, one of the technologies that I'm mostly fascinated by is self-driving vehicles. I can think of very high, I can see very high potential for very dramatic societal changes once private cars are out of the picture and robots can take care of us. Like I can also see how that may end up in disaster, or very dramatic negative changes. So it's a very fine balance. But I look at that with very fascination. But on a more positive note, like on here, like another area that I have high expectations for are all these advancements in medical research and in addressing climate change, like weather modeling, to support agriculture. On that front, I don't see much of a path to negative outcomes.
One area I'm passionate about, and I think that's something that's going to to come up more and more over the coming years, is AI for development. There's a lot of things, especially here in France, that we take for granted, like free healthcare, free education. This is threatened, of course, even in the UK as well, where you are, and there's a lot of headlines about the NHS. But broadly, we have it pretty good. How do we make sure that this is available to the billions of people who are not as privileged, and AI can be a great way of democratizing that. For example, when it comes to healthcare, there's a lot of there are some experiments with equipping community health workers who are not, who are very close to the ground, but they're not. There is a shortage of doctors. But can you have the best of both worlds with community health workers who have access to AI to deliver first line of care, for example? The same goes with education. We talk a lot about how students are using ChatGPT to cheat, but I think this is a very short-sighted view, right? And broadly, we have to harness AI as an opportunity for learning and for having, every child having a personal tutor. Of course, that requires rethinking the way we approach education, and maybe it being a little bit less about rote-based learning and testing people, but more about teaching people to learn, learning how to learn, learning how to ask the right questions, and basically learning to be how to you're learning to learn in the world with AI, where things are going to be, of course, going to be different. It is scary, but there's also a lot of opportunities, and I think these opportunities can be realized very powerfully in the developing world.
I think what you're describing here is called critical thinking. And indeed, it's not necessarily something you can teach people. But you're right, Paul, because I have a lot of teachers in my ecosystem and they are tearing their hair out at the moment because of the use of AI tools, of course, to produce work. A huge thanks to both of you for your thoughts and for sharing really powerful examples with us of how open source communities and an open source, trust oriented mindset can really change things. So many thanks to you, Stefano and Paul, for your great insights and examples today.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Much pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Our absolute pleasure. And many thanks, of course, to everyone out there watching us. You can, of course, have a look and watch the full session. It's available on the Zayed Prize YouTube channel. Many thanks to everyone.